Two Gold and Black Live. Tim Newton gets a gold star because anybody that would come on this show twice in 1 year either needs to have more to do, which is not true because Tim has a lot to do.
All right, I know why I'm here today, and it took me a while to figure this out.
Okay.
Your next segment is with Lauren Link,
Yes,
right?
that's
on
true.
Sport. This is a before and after. This is what happens
I like that.
when you don't eat well and don't take care of your body, and then Lauren's going to come in and show you the after.
I know.
Brilliant
I
programming
know,
on your part.
it is. And that NCAA tournament thing, it's like everybody has left the building at Purdue. But let's start with that. Obviously Purdue last night, we were all up late watching. You have watched a lot of college basketball, men and women's, through your time. What did you see last night?
Well, you saw a team that was locked in defensively, and I think a little bit surprisingly, given that no Gel Eastern, your best defender, didn't play in the first half, and I don't think he was at 100% in the second. But I thought from the opening tip, they had a great team concept. I thought they had a great game plan against Old Dominion defensively, and even though the shots didn't fall, I mean, you think last night Carson and Ryan Klein go 8 for 34, and you win an NCAA game by double digits.
Cover the spread, as they say.
Do people still bet?
I don't know if they do at all. Not
That is amazing to me. But it's defense, and the old cliche, we've heard it for years: defense wins championships. Well, last night defense got Purdue to the second round. Now they're going to need a little bit more offense against Villanova, but if they can play with the same defensive intensity, you looked at that Villanova game last night, and yet they're a good basketball team, but they're not a scary team like they've been the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's a six-seeded team. We talked in the first segment about their pedigree, Tim. This team's been in a lot of big games in recent history. Great coach in Jay Wright. So,
and it'll be like a home game.
Yeah, it'll be like a home game. The moment's not going to be too big for Villanova. So we'll see. I'd love to know, Tim, what you thought of Eric Hunter. I mean, the lift that he provided, and then of course Aaron Wheeler too, going back to his home state, and I think he had 8 points in the first half. Those two guys, the lift they provided in that opening 20 minutes was remarkable.
I talked to Aaron Wheeler Sunday night after the draw came out, and you could tell how excited he was, not just to play in his home state, but just to play in the NCAA tournament period. He said, as a kid growing up, that's what you watch. That's what you grow up and hope to do someday. And the chance to be able to do that before a lot of family and friends, I'm sure, was really exciting. I thought he played very well. Eric Hunter, even though he didn't score a lot, I thought was very effective, efficient with the ball, played solid defense, and that's what you hope. You hope that your freshmen and some of your role players right now can come up big in these big games.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's a huge factor on if you can beat a team. And how much, you've been around championship team. You obviously saw the Purdue women win it all in 1999, but that there's a mentality that goes with that. Villanova has that, and being able to slay the dragon, so to speak, put an end to that is not going to be easy for anybody, I would think. Just to get them out of the tournament, a tournament they've won 2 of the last 3 years.
I like to refer to it as a little bit of an earned arrogance, and they don't maybe show that arrogance outwardly, but they know inwardly, hey, we've stood on the platform before with the confetti coming down.
Yeah.
We understand what it takes, and you got Jay Wright, who's got the pedigree of winning in the NCAA tournament, so it'll be a tough one tomorrow, but I think, again, it's a game that is winnable. And I think if this team could win a Big Ten regular season championship and get to the second weekend of the Big Ten or the NCAA tournament, anything from there on is pure gravy. I think that'd be real icing on the cake.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. If they beat Villanova, this is gravy. And Tim Allen and I have talked a number of times this winter about remarkable seasons we didn't see coming in Purdue men's basketball. I would love to know, this is one of those years, but you've got a great perspective too. Put this season in context with maybe some other basketball seasons where Purdue had wildly unexpected success.
I think you go back to a lot of those early Gene Cady teams. Was it the 83-84 season that nobody expected anything, and Purdue winds up winning that year, and they win the conference, and I think those seasons are a little bit more special and more fun. It's great to be expected to win and win. There's nothing wrong with that. It's hard to do. But when nobody puts big expectations on you externally, I think there's a little bit of that. Certainly a winner's mentality. Ryan Klein has been a winner his whole Purdue career. Grady Eifert's been a winner. Now, they haven't been starters and 30-minute-a-game guys, but they've been around winning. They understand what it takes. And Yeah, right off the top of my head, that 83, 84 team comes to mind right away, just because it was Ricky, and I always remember Ricky Hall with that
Ricky
team and
Hall.
how important he was to it.
Yeah, great defender.
And I remember going out to the airport when
Yeah.
Purdue landed after winning the Big Ten championship, and the mob scene that was out there. It was a lot of fun.
What about the third title in the three-peat run, the 95-96
Oh, absolutely.
team?
Yeah,
Number
absolutely.
one seed, too.
Yes, yes. And almost lost as the number one
Western
seed.
Carolina.
So here's
Almost a great trivia question,
the
right?
women's team was in Lubbock then.
Right.
The men's team was playing in Albuquerque, and I rented a car and took a group of people back and forth. We literally dodged tumbleweeds as we drove out of Lubbock, Texas, and got to Albuquerque. And there's a shot in the air by Western Carolina.
Yeah.
If it goes down, Purdue's the first number one seed to lose. But
How far a drive is it from Lubbock to Albuquerque? Do you need to
all night
remember?
long.
Okay.
It was 6 or 7 hours, but it was the most desolate drive. There was a point somewhere, I don't know where we were, in Texas or New Mexico. You looked around 360, you didn't see a house, a car, any sign of civilization. And again, I don't know, did we have cell phones back
You
in?
might have had maybe a bag phone at that
Yeah.
time.
You're just hoping your rental car is good. Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Where would we be without cell phones? I think we might be happier.
I think we
sometime.
might
Yeah,
be.
it would be too.
All right, and I think I misspoke. I guess the Purdue game is on TNT, not
It is
TBS.
TNT,
I
yeah.
screwed that up, but that wouldn't be the first or last time I'll do that. All right, Tim's other basketball job, obviously, is covering Purdue women's basketball. The Boilermakers finished 19-15, made a little bit of run in the Big Ten tournament. I don't think you can argue that the program isn't where, it's the first time, I believe, since they started going to NCAA tournaments that they've gone back-to-back years without getting in the tournament. How do you look at that from your perspective? Sharon Versip, it's disappointing to her. She's a competitive person, but not where they want to be.
You left Williams Arena at the end of January after a win, 15-6 overall,
Yeah.
6-2 in the Big Ten, and you're thinking NCAA tournament certainly is on the table. Big Ten tournament double bye is on the table. Maybe if you get a couple breaks, Big Ten championship is on the table. And then they lost 8 of 10 down the stretch. And there are a lot of reasons for it, but the biggest reason is you can't put the ball in the basket.
Yeah.
And Big Ten basketball on the women's side and on the men's side, I think we're kind of shifting back, although it's ironic we talked about defense and about the defense that the Purdue men played. On the women's side, we've gone back to scoring now.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to score. You look at Iowa this year with Megan Gustafson, who's the player of the year in the Big Ten. You've got to be able to put the ball in the basket. And this was a team that just didn't have enough weapons offensively. They had Dominique Ode, Ariana Harris, Carissa McLaughlin were pretty steady night after night, but you didn't have that fourth scorer. And when you can't, in the regular season, they scored 70 points or more in the Big Ten twice in 18 games.
Yeah.
It's awfully hard to win night after night if your defense isn't point on or spot on. And I think part of it, too, they wore down a little bit. Those kids had to play a lot of minutes because you didn't have a lot of depth in there. So it's a big year coming back because you've got everybody back. In theory, you're bringing in the highest rated recruit that Sharon's had in her 14 years here, Ricky Waltman from St. Louis. Janelle Grant, I know they're expecting big things for her, the transfer from Pacific. So it's going to be a very important season this year.
Yeah, like I said, that's a program. Tim, when I was in college in the mid-'80s, I kind of got to see it grow up. I was here for Lynn Dunn's first year,
Yep.
keeping statistics at games with the SID department, saw him get that WNIT bid. So
Yep.
Sharon was part of that team. Her senior year was 87-88,
Yeah.
former Miss Basketball. So we all know what Purdue women's basketball can be, Sharon Versip included. So sounds like there's some potential maybe for next year for the program to sort of flip the script.
I do think the landscape has changed, and this will be my 30th year coming up, and I think the landscape in recruiting has changed where Notre Dame was not a power when I started this 3 decades ago, and Michigan State didn't come into Indiana and take players, and Ohio State really didn't come into Indiana. Now you're having a hard time keeping those great players from Indiana in state, the Stephanie Whites that you need, the Katie Douglases, those kind of kids, Katie Geralds. That's a key to try to seal the borders back off and get the best players in the state to come in. So we'll see.
Big year for
Big year.
Big
It's a
year
big
for
year.
Sharon
I think
Versip.
it's a
Big
big
year for
year.
the program
Yeah.
coming up because there will be some expectations of trying to move that forward. All right, spring football. So much gets determined in spring football. It's unbelievable. Isn't it great? Tom Dienhart has joined us, and we're so glad that he's with us.
I think
Well,
you ought to
you're
write a
making
book.
chicken salad out of this.
You ought to write a book, Legends of the Spring Game.
Yeah,
and
I always
see,
thought of a great moments in Purdue spring football history. Alex Horvath's in the Hall of Fame. for that
absolutely. Samisi Fakasieki made himself a household name.
God, I'm
couple
now.
of years
I'm
ago.
having a near senior moment.
story. You
'cause
know how sick we are.
Yeah, there you go.
there are some classic names of guys,
Yes, there
because there
are.
are guys that have run for 80 yards in the spring game that forever in our internet world have landed on our message boards about why is this guy not playing halfway through the year, and the reason why, because he couldn't.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but you've got a lot of interest and some problems to begin to solve that you may not be able to solve.
Mm-hmm.
Tom has chronicled, and you're very aware of that interior. I look at the interior offensive line as maybe the biggest problem. You got to have a center, and you got to have guards, and and we saw at times Purdue last year really struggling with this offensive line in depth, et cetera. What do you look at?
Well, I can tell you I had a conversation with Coach Brown a couple of days ago for a few minutes, and that's number one, first and foremost on
Yeah.
his mind. You've got to get the offensive line fixed. And I don't think that recruiting is completely done for the 2019
Yeah,
football
I'm guessing
season.
not.
I think we'll just say that
Yeah.
that's still on the table. So if you can get that, particularly the interior of that line fixed, Bryson Hopkins is a known quantity at tight end. You've got great talent at the wide receiver position. To be a little bit young, you know, I think Horvath and Fuller and whoever else is going to come in the fall are going to give you enough at running back. And I think Elijah Sindelar. When's the last? How about this? When's the last time Purdue announced
Yeah.
in spring ball who the quarterback? It didn't happen in the Daryl Hazel era. It didn't happen in the first 2 years of the Jeff Brom era. I'm not sure with Danny Hope.
I think it's
Didn't happen.
2008 Curtis Painter is
It
the
may
answer to
be.
that. answer to
Johnny
that
Jerry
trivia question.
Elliott didn't maybe.
Oh, Joey Elliott probably knew in 9.
Yeah.
That's probably true, that Joey Elliott was a known, but Danny Hope would have never admitted it.
No.
But yes, I think that may have been the case. But anyway, yeah, all kinds of, there are some, I did see the little segment of the Jack Plummer throw to Rondale Moore. He's pretty good, that number 4.
He's got a chance to. He's got a chance to stick around for a while.
He's-
You know, I saw him. He took his shoulder pads and his shirt off,
Yeah.
and he looks like a bodybuilder.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
if you ever get the chance to see Rondale, it is very impressive. You can see why guys bounce off him. He would be
So-
another one for the next segment
Yeah.
of the program, the after segment that we're going to have coming up here.
Whatever he's eating, keep eating it, right?
And Tom, I don't know if it struck you, but just looking, you look at the eyeball test, and what does a team look like? And if you looked at Purdue 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it didn't look like a Big Ten football team. I look out there now, particularly in the secondary.
Yes.
Now, I'm not talking about from a talent standpoint, but you look out there, and these guys look like they belong in a Big Ten secondary.
Yeah, the only projected starter in the secondary who's under 6 feet tall is Dedrick Mackey. So he's 5'11". They list him at 5'11". So you're right. Look at Corey Trice. You look at Jalen Graham, 2 6'3" safeties. You know, Kenneth Majors, a 6-foot cornerback. The backups, you know, Jordan Rucker. On and on it goes. You're right. They passed the eyeball test coming off the plane, so to speak, in the secondary. And Tim, also up front, I think, offensive and defensive line. They've got some good-looking young redshirt freshmen offensive linemen. They still may be a year away from really contributing, although one right now, Jimmy McKenna, has been running first-team guard most of these last 4 or 5 spring practices. But you're right. Brom has really turned this roster over and made it look like more of a Big Ten roster.
You get the sense, too, talking to him,
Yeah.
and I know a lot of Purdue fans are really excited, as they should be, about the recruiting class that he brought in. You get the sense with him, in his mind, this was not a one-time thing. This is going to be what a typical Purdue recruiting class is going to look like. They're going to shoot for the top guys. They're going to get guys in here that are Big Ten ready and ready to contribute right off the bat. And I think the more success they can have, because I know that 13-13 after 2 years, while it's certainly an improvement over what Purdue has had, that's not good enough for Jeff. And eventually it's not going to be good enough for the fan base either.
We all get spoiled. I'll say this, Tim. At practice on Wednesday, I talked to a kid from the IMG Academy in Florida. His mom and dad is on a visit here. Already has an offer from Alabama. Was getting ready to go to Notre Dame after he was in West Lafayette. Just to give you an idea how far recruiting's come, they got kids with Alabama offers visiting Purdue in the spring. And this kid's only going to be a junior in high school.
Yeah, and a few years ago, the only way you guys are going to get those guys in West Lafayette is if they need a rest stop on their way up. You know, they weren't going to make that stop here. So, yeah, you got to get in with the big boys, and you're going to lose a lot of those
Sure you
battles,
will.
but you're going to win some.
Yep.
And those guys are the difference makers.
The thing I find interesting that is there's a tremendous strategy to that, because you have to be, and Jeff Brom has shown early on that he can do it, because you got to know that, you know, you got to figure out a way to at least compete with a Michigan and Notre Dame and Ohio State directly or indirectly there, to know that you have to know whether you have a legitimate shot at these guys and not to waste time. That's what's an interesting, and he's done a very good job of getting visits in. That's what's been a really interesting part of this.
As the great American philosopher Ric Flair once said it, in order to be the best, you got to beat the best.
Yeah.
And if you're going to play and be a top 25 team and compete for Big Ten championships and play in Indianapolis, hey, you're going to have to go toe-to-toe with Michigan and Ohio State, and you're going to have to beat them on some of these guys. Now, you got to choose your battles wisely.
Yeah.
But it's very exciting. I think year 3, and I don't know if you feel this way, if you feel this way, I think year 3 could be, hopefully is the takeoff year. I think we've seen the gradual upward. This might be the year that maybe this thing, and especially if they can get the offensive line fixed.
Yeah.
You got a chance to put up an awful lot of points with the talent on this team right now.
And the schedule is conducive to winning as well, in my view, just the way it plays out. And you have to be careful counting victories on March the 22nd, but it is going to be an interesting scenario from that standpoint. What, you look at that, the quarterback position, and again, sometimes our readers, and we certainly all pay attention to backup quarterbacks, but that's an important thing. I mean, whether it's Plummer, and I know Nick Sipes had some injuries, but that's an important thing to get figured out early on. What's been your impression of what you've seen, and then I'll throw that to Tom as well.
I think Jack Plummer right now is your clear number 2. Certainly Elijah Sindelar is going to be the guy coming in this year as the starter for 1 year, possibly 2, depending on how things break. And I think there's a pretty good chance that'll break well.
Yeah, I think so.
And then Jack Plummer, I think they would feel okay if they had to put Jack Plummer in a game right now that he could go out and win some football games.
Throws the ball very well, you're right. But back to Sindelar, he's really throwing the ball well. And you talked about the dynamic of this being his team, Tim. Mm-hmm. David Bilau's gone. How will that impact Elijah? It seems like he's got more, I don't know if you want to call it swagger, but he knows this is his team, and he's playing with a little bit of swagger early on in practice. And you're right, the key too, Alan, is going to be that O-line. You got to protect Sindelar. We know the injury history, the knee, here at the oblique last year as well. If he goes down, Plummer's good, but he's just going to be, a redshirt freshman.
Go back to 2000, which of course was a magical year, and think of how many times in a game Drew Brees not only didn't get sacked, didn't get touched,
Great line.
didn't hit the ground.
I think they led the country, or one of the top 2 or 3, right?
If this line can protect Elijah Sindelar, I'm not going to say he's going to put up Brees numbers and have that kind of year, but he's got the ability to put up enormous numbers. But he's not a guy that's going to be able to run for his life. He's not a guy that's going to, you don't want him running the football. You don't want him taking a lot of hits back there. So you're going to have to protect him.
Yeah.
You're going to have to give him time to throw. But with the weapons he's got right now, it really is exciting to think about what you can do with this offense, because he can get the ball down the field.
Spring game, April the 6th. One last question is just dealing with, how have you sensed, and I'll ask Tom the same question, in terms of, you got embarrassed in your bowl game.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we all were sitting there, and you had to talk about it.
Time actually went backward that day. I am convinced that time went backward. Somehow there was more time left at one point in the game than there was a half hour before.
I was worried that thing was going to be 100-0. It didn't end up that way. It could have been. Yet, how has the coaching staff, and I've been meaning to ask Tom this as well, use that on the front end, or do you sense that they will in some format, just because that has to be some reminder that you haven't arrived yet, so to speak?
Well, I think we asked Nick Holt about it after
early on,
and they were embarrassed.
Yeah,
and you asked the players, they were embarrassed. Yeah. And while it was not a fun thing to go through, in the long term, that game may turn out to be a blessing in disguise, because I think if this team needed any motivation or any sense that, hey, we do have a lot of work to do, we're not there yet, we've got to work harder, that day brought it into focus.
Yeah.
And I think that I think it should be a pretty motivated football team that hits the field in Nevada.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. We asked Dirk Barnes that too, and I asked him if they had the score pinned up in the locker room anywhere, and he said, "Of course not." So there's part of me that if I'm a player or coach, maybe I just burn that film and say, "Look, guys, we know what happened on that day in Nashville. Let's not relive it. Let's turn the page. We know we have a lot of work to do. It's obvious." So that may be my approach if I was a coach. I don't know how much I'd want to harp on it.
Yeah.
It was a historic loss.
Yeah.
It was an embarrassing loss.
The only thing I left Nashville with was the thought, how did that team lose 5 games?
Oh, yeah.
Because
Yeah,
I thought they were
yeah.
I thought they were a more talented football team than Ohio State.
It's an indictment of Gus Malzahn.
My favorite story of that is that our perspective, and I get the privilege of sitting next to Tim and helping him a little bit with the football broadcast, is that our vantage point, it was one of the lowest press boxes, and I was watching Auburn warm up, and you could see, and that's one thing that television doesn't quite do, when you see the physicality, the physical difference of their defense especially, but really their entire team versus where Purdue is, and Purdue's come a distance. That was
It
that was
looked
a tough
like
one.
just eyeball. It was looked like a varsity team against a JV
Yeah.
team when
And-
they lined up.
yeah,
And
they-
unfortunately,
so
that's how it turned out.
Yeah.
All right, this conversation could go on in a craft brewery somewhere in town. I don't know if Tim does.
Triple X.
I got to go work out.
I know. We got
Do
Lauren's
something.
here to bring us back to health in a lot of different ways. But we're looking forward to talking nutrition and fitness. But we're glad to have had the opportunity to talk football, little women's and men's basketball from one of the. He's not old enough quite to be a legend, but he's getting there. And in Purdue and Tim Newton, and we'll look forward to his call. That's going to be August the 30th now, right? A Friday night.
Yeah,
Nevada?
Friday night.
And out in Reno, and that ought to be a fun trip as well. Okay, we're going to take a 2-minute break. We're going to bring in Lauren Link, and look forward to that final segment on Golden Black Live. We'll see you in 2 minutes.
To the Purdue game, stay at the Hilton Garden Inn, West